Japan is a string of islands in the Western Pacific, a narrow, dramatic land shaped by mountains, sea, and weather. Its landscape is mostly steep and volcanic. Rivers run fast. Coastal plains are narrow. Rice paddies patch the lowlands like green tiles. This geography kept communities apart and helped them grow different local ways of life. It also gave Japan a kind of quiet, long-lasting independence that shaped its story from the very start. People reached these islands long ago when seas were lower and land bridges linked Japan to the mainland. Those first communities lived close to the forests and the sea. They honored the spirits of nature, they made pottery, they hunted, and they left traces of a deep relationship with the land. Later, migrants brought wet rice farming, metal tools, and new skills. Rice farming changed everything. It needed teamwork, irrigation, steady labor, and organization. Villages grew, strong families rose, power began to concentrate. From these roots, the Yamato rulers emerged and began to knit many clans together into a single state. They claimed a sacred line of descent from the sun goddess, a claim that helped their rule seem more than just politics. Around this time, ideas, religion, and writing arrived from the continent. Buddhism, Chinese characters, and new administrative systems changed how Japan was ruled and how people thought about the world. Still, Japan never simply copied the mainland. It chose what to keep, and it made those things Japanese in a new way. Over the centuries, a warrior class grew in importance. These men, called samurai, literally those who serve, were not only fighters. They were administrators, household managers, and cultural patrons. They followed a strict sense of duty and an ethic that prized loyalty, discipline, and courage. Over time, their values shaped the nation. They refined arts and learning even as they prepared for war. The samurai ideal blended action with calm, a belief that strength and taste, sword and ink, belonged together. War and peace reshaped Japan more than once. Periods of violent conflict gave way to long eras of stability. Three great leaders, Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, emerged from the chaos and united the country. Their victories ended the age of constant war and opened a long chapter of order and growth. Under the Tokugawa system, society was reorganized. Rulers limited foreign contact and set strict social roles. Samurai became officials, peasants tended the land, merchants and artisans filled the towns. The rules created peace, but also tightened the lines that divided people. File site turn full 11. Yet, the samurai story does not end with swords laid down. Even after feudal power faded, the samurai's influence remained. Their arts, their sense of discipline, and their ideas about honor left marks on later Japan. In modern times, writers, artists, and everyday life still echo samurai values, sometimes as history, sometimes as myth, and often as a living thread that links the past to the present. Origins: early Japan. Long before courts and castles, people lived off the land here. The first settlers reached these islands when the seas were lower, walking across land bridges from the Asian mainland. They lived as hunters and fishers. They made some of the oldest pottery in the world. They built pit houses in small villages, and they honored the spirits in the forests, rivers, and sea. Those early beliefs, a deep respect for nature and the unseen, are the roots of what later became Shinto. Around 900 BCE, something changed. New people arrived from the continent and brought wet rice farming, weaving, and metal tools. Rice farming is hard work and it needs planning, irrigation, coordinated planting, shared labor. That work helped villages grow and stay put. Fields produced more food. Bigger harvests meant more people, more goods, and more social layers. Leaders began to stand out. Over generations, power flowed into the hands of clan chiefs who could organize labor and defend land. As communities grew, so did trade and contact across the water. Objects from Korea and China, bronze mirrors, metal weapons, and stylish ornaments appear in early graves and settlements. Those items show not only trade, but also exchange of ideas. The Japanese islands were never entirely cut off. Traders and diplomats carried goods, techniques, and beliefs that would be borrowed, changed, and made. By the 3rd and 4th centuries CE, signs of concentrated power are clear. Large burial mounds, the kofun, rise across the land. Some of these tombs are enormous, shaped like keys and surrounded by moats. Inside were weapons, horse trappings, and rich offerings. These burials mark leaders who could command many workers and vast resources. They point to a new kind of society, more hierarchy, more military power, and the first outlines of rulership on a national scale. Chinese records from this period describe a country called Wa, and even mention a powerful queen, Himiko, who ruled from Yamatai. Accounts like these show that observers on the continent already recognized political centers in Japan. They also hint at how spiritual authority and political power often mixed. Rulers could be priests and religion could be a source of legitimacy. From these early centers, one clan rose to greater influence, the Yamato. The Yamato rulers claimed descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu. That claim was not simply a myth, it was politics with a sacred face. By tying their family to divine ancestry, Yamato leaders made their authority feel older and more absolute. Over centuries, they used marriage, alliance, and warfare to knit many clans into a rough political network centered in central Japan. A turning point came when Buddhism arrived, brought across the sea with books, icons, and new ideas. Officially introduced in the 6th century, Buddhism opened doors to continental learning, Chinese writing, calendar methods, statecraft, and legal ideas. Some clans resisted, fearing foreign influence. Others embraced the new faith because it offered prestige, technology, and a stronger state model. Over time, Buddhism blended with native beliefs rather than replacing them. Prince Shotoku stands out in this new age. Acting as regent at the turn of the 7th century, he promoted Buddhism, sent envoys and students to Tang China, and encouraged the use of Chinese-style government practices. He also composed a short set of moral rules for officials, a document that urged harmony, respect, and proper conduct. These moves were less about copying China than about adopting tools that could help build a stronger, more organized state. In 645 CE, the Taika reforms aimed to transform clan power into imperial power. The reforms tried to centralize the land and administration on a Chinese model. The emperor, as owner of all land, appointed officials running provinces and legal codes to bind the system together. In practice, the reforms had limits. Japan's mountains and islands made tight central control difficult. Local aristocrats and powerful families kept real authority in many regions. Still, Taika and later reforms set a new direction, a stronger court, formal ranks, and the idea of a single polity under an imperial center. Around the same time, the Japanese began to write down their own stories. The Kojiki, 712, and Nihon Shoki, 720, mix myth and history. They tell of gods, the birth of the islands, and the imperial line. Those chronicles helped shape a national memory and gave the court a narrative that reinforced imperial legitimacy. Writing also made possible official records, law, and poetry, tools that would shape culture and politics for centuries. So by the end of the early era, Japan had changed from small mobile bands of hunters to settled rice communities, from scattered chiefs to a court-centered polity. It had borrowed freely technology, faith, and ideas, but had adapted them into something new. The stage was set. Ritual and rule, shrine and state, local custom and continental learning would all fight and fuse as Japan moved toward its classical age. Court and culture, Nara and Heian Japan. After the early state took shape, 2 long ages of court rule built much of what people now think of as classical Japan. First came Nara, where the court and great Buddhist temples rose up in grand public fashion. Then came Heian, Kyoto, where a small circle of nobles made beauty the center of life. In both places, religion, writing, and taste shaped who could rule and what life meant. The Nara court imagined itself as a state on the model of Tang China. Officials kept records, built temples, and compiled laws. The great temples were not only places of worship, they were centers of art, learning, and political power. Bronze Buddhas, carved sculptures, and long hymn collections showed a confident, ruled society that used religion to hold people together. At the same time, collections of poetry such as the Manyoshu captured a quieter voice. Farmers and courtiers, priests and frontier guards, all writing short, intense poems about wind, snow, loss, and longing. Then, in 794, the capital moved to Heian. Kyoto became a world of small courtiers and fine rules. The real power rested with a few aristocratic families who lived in long, low mansions and measured life in seasons, scents, and poems. The Fujiwara family, above all, grew powerful by marrying its daughters into the imperial line. As maternal relatives and often regents to young emperors, the Fujiwara held the levers of government, while the emperor remained a sacred center for ritual. Court rank, costume, and ritual matters counted for everything. Culture was the court's language. Men and women of rank learned to write poems, compose music, keep refined diaries, and judge the beauty of a single verse. They practiced small arts, the arrangement of incense, the folding of sleeves, the right color of a robe for a given season. This world loved the subtle and the suggestive. A feeling called mono no aware, a soft, sad awareness of the passing of things, became a guiding moral for taste. The court found meaning in falling cherry blossoms, in the faint echo of a poem, in the small grace of a well-placed line. Women became the era's greatest writers. Because court men wrote official business in Chinese, many women used the new kana scripts to write in the spoken language. The result was an outpouring of diaries, stories, and poems written in clear, intimate Japanese. The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu offers a long, tender study of court life, love, and character. Other women kept sharp, vivid diaries that record daily life with deep feeling and precise observation. These texts created a lasting literary standard and helped shape Japanese ideas about feeling, polish, and subtlety. Beneath the court's gardens and poems, reality changed. The ideal of a central, well-ordered state strained under geography and time. Large estates, owned by temples, shrines, and noble houses, escaped central taxes. Local managers and estate stewards accumulated power. The Ritsuryo system of official land redistribution weakened. Provincial offices became hereditary. In the countryside, those who managed land and raised troops grew stronger, while the court's practical control faded. From these provincial developments, the first samurai began to appear. Originally low-status guards and mounted retainers, they protected estates and enforced local order. Over time, they developed a distinct ethic, skill in arms, loyalty to a lord, and a pragmatic sense of honor. The court's refined life and the provincial warrior life remained in uneasy contact. Warriors sometimes adopted courtly arts. Courtiers sometimes relied on warriors for security. But the balance was shifting. The refined world of Heian remained superbly influential in taste and literature, while political weight was moving toward the provinces. Religious life in the period was complex. New Buddhist sects spread, and many temples became wealthy landholders. Buddhism also fed art and thought, chanting rituals, new sculptural styles, and imported ideas about life and death that mixed with native Shinto belief. This mix shaped how people in court and countryside alike thought about fate, duty, and the passing of time. By the late Heian, the scene was set for change. Court rivalries, estate disputes, and the growing power of warrior clans produced open conflict. The Taira and Minamoto families, both with military backgrounds and claims to imperial descent, rose to the fore. Tensions that began at the edges of court life would soon produce the great wars that ended Heian political dominance. The age of careful lacquer work, scented poems, and courtly ritual did not vanish. It stayed alive as culture, even as a new warrior-led order prepared to take power. War and Rule: The Rise of the Samurai in the Kamakura Shogunate, narrator script. The delicate balance of court life in Kyoto finally broke under the weight of armed clans and open war. Two great houses, the Taira, also called Heiki, and the Minamoto, Genji, clashed in a long struggle for power. The fighting moved from estate quarrels to full-scale war. The struggle ended at sea in a terrible, decisive fight that left one house destroyed and the other ready to rule. From the ruin came a new order. Minamoto no Yoritomo gathered victory, followers, and the loyalty of many provincial warriors. In 1192, he received the title of Shogun, commander-in-chief, and set up his government at Kamakura, far from the emperor's court in Kyoto. This was not a simple replacement of the old order. Instead, it created a dual system. The emperor stayed as a sacred center for ritual and legitimacy, while the shogun ran military and practical affairs. Two powers now shared Japan. The new government, called the Bakufu, worked in practical ways. The shogunate gave land rights and management duties to trusted warriors. Officials called Jito managed estates and collected taxes. Others, called Shugo, supervised provinces and kept the peace. These appointments tied military service to economic reward. Warriors received rights, not always full ownership, but enough to feed their households and keep their horses and weapons. Over time, these military offices became hereditary, creating new regional powers. War changed manners and law. The samurai were not merely fighters, they were administrators, judges, and stewards. The Kamakura regime made laws to govern disputes among landholders and to fix the duties of vassals. A short legal code and a set of records known as the Joi regulations helped the Bakufu settle claims and keep order without the court's slow ceremonial ways. Justice grew practical and local. Culture shifted along with politics. The violent years produced new kinds of literature, war tales that blended history and drama. The Heika Monogatari, the great story of the Taira's rise and fall, taught listeners about fate, pride, and the beauty of loss. These tales were meant for performance. They traveled with warriors and monks, and they helped shape a shared memory of the wars and the lessons they carried. Religion adapted too. New Buddhist movements reached the countryside and the camps. Some teachings promised simple faith and salvation for ordinary people. Zen Buddhism, arriving from the continent, found favor among warriors because it valued discipline, mental focus, and direct experience. Zen's plain aesthetic, quiet rooms, simple gardens, deliberate acts, fit the samurai temperament and later influenced art, tea, and ink painting. The Kamakura state proved its strength when foreign danger came. Twice in the late 13th century, the Mongol Empire tried to invade Japan. Huge fleets crossed the sea in 1274 and again in 1281. Samurai fought with courage, and storms, the famous divine winds, helped blunt the invasions. The attacks left the Bakufu strained. It spent vast resources preparing defenses, and it found itself owing rewards to many warriors who had no new land to claim. The financial pressure weakened central control and helped powerful regents and clans at Kamakura to tighten their hold on practical power. Power concentrated not only in men with swords, but in men with offices. After Yoritomo's death, his family lost direct control. Real power passed to the Hojo regents, who controlled the shogunate's appointments and enforced rule. The Hojo balanced ambition and caution. They extended administration, increased record-keeping, and kept the system running by careful management rather than dramatic rule. Japan now had a long era in which warrior families managed the country's day-to-day affairs from Kamakura. Economy and society adapted. The rise of warrior houses changed landholding, labor, and markets. Markets and small towns around castle towns grew as warriors needed supplies and services. Money became more common. New social ties, patronage, legal contracts, and military obligation shaped people's lives more than old court rank. The countryside grew more organized under local managers, and a distinct medieval order took root across Japan. By the end of the Kamakura period, the model was clear. A samurai-centered government that kept the emperor as a sacred symbol, strong local lords who ran daily life, and a growing culture that mixed martial seriousness with literary and religious creativity. The Kamakura world set the tone for medieval Japan. It showed how force, law, faith, and taste could combine to form a stable, if often tense, society. Unification, Oda Toyotomi Tokugawa. The century of war ended not by accident, but by the work of a few determined men. Their lives overlapped, each built on the success and the mistakes of the one before. Together they created the institutions that would govern Japan for more than 200 years. Oda Nobunaga came first. He rose from a provincial lord to a national power by using speed, surprise, and new technology. In 1560, at Okahazama, he surprised and defeated a much larger army. That victory made his name and opened the path for wider ambition. Nobunaga was bold and ruthless. He attacked powerful warrior monasteries that had become political actors, and he destroyed Enryaku-ji on Mount Hiei in 1571 to break their armed influence. He welcomed foreign trade and new weapons. Guns and European trade ships were tools he used without shame. Nobunaga also changed the economy and the way war was fought. He supported free markets and removed some old restrictions that had held back trade. Castle towns grew under his protection. At Nagashino in 1575, he used massed arquebusiers arranged behind wooden palisades to break the charge of mounted samurai. That moment showed how firearms and organized infantry could defeat traditional cavalry tactics. Nobunaga's use of technology, combined with fast movement and political calculation, let him cut through many rival coalitions. Still, he did not live long enough to finish the job. He died in 1582 after betrayal at Honnoji, where one of his retainers turned on him. Toyotomi Hideyoshi finished what Nobunaga had begun. Hideyoshi's story is striking. He rose from humble origins to become the country's master. He was a brilliant organizer and an expert at reward and control. Hideyoshi moved quickly to secure loyalty. He completed a national survey of land and people, a cadastral project that measured fields and assessed their value in rice. This survey let the state calculate tax obligations with greater precision. It tied power to rice production and created a clearer basis for rule. One of Hideyoshi's most decisive policies was social separation. In 1588, he ordered the famous sword hunt. Peasants were made to surrender weapons so that the soldier class would be clearly separated from the farming class. That act was meant to prevent future uprisings and to fix social roles. Samurai would be warriors and administrators, peasants would farm. Hideyoshi also ordered a national registry of households, enforced restrictions on building new fortifications, and redistributed lands to reward loyal generals. He built grand castles, most famously Osaka Castle, as centers of power and control. Hideyoshi's rule was also cultural. He patronized the tea ceremony and the arts. By controlling court ranks and titles, he linked military success with political prestige. But his reign had a darker side. His ambition led to overseas war. In 1592, he launched an invasion of Korea with the aim of moving into the continent. The campaigns dragged on, were costly, and ultimately failed. They left the state exhausted and unsettled. Hideyoshi died in 1598, leaving a child heir and a fragile balance of power among his generals. Tokugawa Ieyasu was the patient man who took advantage of that fragility. He had long been a political survivor, moving among alliances and building a network of followers. After Hideyoshi's death, Ieyasu waited. He gathered allies, kept his forces ready, and seized the moment at Sekigahara in 1600. There, he defeated the main coalition arrayed against him. His victory cleared the way to power. In 1603, Ieyasu received the title of Shogun and established his government at Edo. That move created a new political framework. The Tokugawa system was careful and conservative by design. It did not rely entirely on force, it relied on structure. Ieyasu and his successors developed a set of rules and institutions to hold the realm together. A central feature of Tokugawa control was the division of daimyo into categories. The shogunate distinguished between close hereditary allies and those who had been outside the inner circle. The close allies, the Fudai daimyo, received trusted offices and often governed strategic provinces. The outside lords, the Tozama daimyo, were powerful but watched with suspicion. This sorting let the shogunate reward loyalty while keeping the strongest regional powers at arm's length. To control the daimyo, the shogunate used several tools. First, there was a system of alternate attendance, sankin-kotai. Daimyo were required to spend part of each year in Edo and part in their domains. Their families often lived in Edo as virtual hostages, while the daimyo lived away from home. This rule forced daimyo to maintain two households and to travel with large retinues, which drained resources that might otherwise fund rebellion. It also turned Edo into a great political and economic center, since daimyo and their followers spent money in the city and supported a wide network of artisans and merchants. Second, the shogunate regulated marriage, land transfers, and political appointments. Land and rank were carefully controlled. The official value of a domain was measured not by acres, but by kokudaka, the assessed rice production. This system focused politics on agricultural yield and taxation, and it made the shogunate the judge of a domain's value and status. Third, the Tokugawa used legal codes and regulations to curb violence and to set expectations. Laws for warrior houses and later sets of rules limited castle construction, forbade unauthorized alliances, and defined punishments for rebellion. The siege of Osaka in 1614-1615 ended the Toyotomi line and sent a clear signal: the Tokugawa would not tolerate major rivals. After Osaka, the shogunate tightened its control. These policies created long peace. Large-scale internal wars stopped. Without constant fighting, towns and commerce grew. Castle towns became administrative and market centers. Artisans, merchants, and a growing urban class built wealth and culture in places far from courtly Kyoto. Roads carried travelers, goods, and information. Commerce expanded inside the islands, and money replaced barter in many transactions. The new order also reshaped social life. Samurai became bureaucrats as often as warriors. Their stipends were paid in rice, and many samurai took up administrative or educational roles. Merchants grew rich but remained low on the official social ladder. Peasants continued to farm but faced strict obligations and taxes. The sankin-kotai system and the financial burden it imposed helped the shogunate keep the daimyo dependent on the central system. Military technology and tactics also changed. Firearms, first adopted widely by Nobunaga, remained part of arsenals, but the Tokugawa period saw fewer decisive pitched battles and more emphasis on administration and order. Castles became symbols of control. Their stone walls, moats, and layered gates reflected both defensive needs and the shogunate's authority. Religion and culture adapted to peace. Tea ceremony, no, poetry, and other refined forms continued under daimyo patronage. At the same time, popular culture, traveling performers, printed books, festivals, flourished in the towns. The arts reflected a world where power and taste had to coexist with commerce and daily life. Foreign relations changed too. Europeans and missionaries had arrived in the 16th century, bringing guns, ships, and Christianity. Nobunaga had welcomed trade. Hideyoshi grew suspicious and finally hostile to Christian influence. the Tokugawa shogunate restricted contact even more. Over time, the shogunate limited foreign trade to selected ports and eventually adopted a policy of isolation that would keep Japan mostly closed for more than 2 centuries. The union that Nobunaga began, Hideyoshi completed, and Tokugawa institutionalized had lasting results. It created a stable political order, reorganized land and taxation, and reshaped social categories. It also fostered urban growth, commercial expansion, and cultural change. The cost was clear: strict controls, limited political freedom, and a closed international posture that would later test Japan when the world outside moved faster. Still, the peace and order the Tokugawa established allowed a distinctive Japanese society to flourish, one built as much on administration and ritual as on the sword. Edo, Peace, Order, and Change, expanded narrator script. For more than 2 centuries, the Tokugawa order held. Peace was the new rule of life, and peace changed everything. The years of constant fighting were over. That quiet created room for people to build cities, grow trade, invent new arts, and remake daily life. It also created slow pressures that would matter later: a rigid social order, rising inequality, and a cautious government that tried to keep the country closed to outside influence. Edo, Osaka, and Kyoto became the great centers of life. Edo, once a fishing village, grew into a vast castle city because the shogun made it his seat. Daimyo sent large processions to and from Edo every year. Their travel led to better roads and to long lines of post towns along the main highways. These highways, the Tokaido and its sister roads, were the arteries of movement. Inns, tea houses, and shops grew at post stations. Travelers, merchants, and pilgrims mixed along the roads carrying news, goods, and ideas. Castle towns formed another kind of city. Around each lord's castle, a town grew up to serve the samurai household and to sell goods to the local population. Craftspeople, shopkeepers, and small markets clustered there. The spatial pattern, castle on high ground, town below, farms beyond, shaped daily life and the local economy. Money became the normal medium of exchange. Taxes were assessed in rice, but cash was used for city life and long-distance trade. Merchants handled grain and goods and moved money across the islands. Over time, they grew rich by buying, selling, lending, and crediting. Because official status gave merchants low honor but did not stop their ability to earn, a new social contrast formed. Merchants were often rich but officially below peasants or samurai. To manage trade, merchants formed groups and guild-like associations. These organizations handled prices, quality, and credit. Merchants lent money to samurai and daimyo when those rulers needed cash. That dependency made city money important to the whole political system. The shogunate tried to limit merchant influence with sumptuary rules that forbade ostentatious display, but the rules were often ignored or worked around. Rice remained the economic heart of the country, but agriculture changed. New irrigation, better seed varieties, and improved methods made fields more productive in many places. Villages became more settled and more organized in their work. Farmers cooperated on irrigation, on pest control, and on harvest sharing. In some regions, new crops, vegetables, cotton, and root crops, spread and changed diets. The growth of cash crops and market links let farmers sell produce into city markets and earn money beyond subsistence. Still, farming was fragile. Bad weather, pests, or heavy taxes could bring famine. Local charity, temple support, and village rules tried to soften disasters, but famine and uprisings did appear in hard years. Those crises tested the local order and sometimes pushed people into the cities in search of work. The Tokugawa system officially divided people into 4 broad groups: samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants. In daily life, those lines mattered, often in ritual and law. Samurai were the ruling class on paper. Peasants produced food, artisans made goods, and merchants moved them. But reality was more flexible. Samurai without money sometimes took on business roles. Peasants who prospered could become local leaders. Merchants married into samurai households or bought official favors when they could. Family life was shaped by household rules. Many families followed strict codes of duty, honor, and inheritance. Household heads managed finances, controlled marriages, and arranged children's futures. Women ran homes, managed markets, and in many cases played active roles in family businesses. Though legal and social limits restricted women's rights in many ways, merchant women often handled money, kept books, and ran shops when husbands were absent. One of the great changes of the era was the spread of basic education. Temple schools and private terracotta taught reading, writing, and arithmetic to the children of townspeople and many farmers. Samurai schools taught Confucian texts, strategy, and administration. As printing grew, textbooks, popular novels, and practical manuals became widely available. Literacy rose in towns, and that made a lively reading public possible. People read plays, travel tales, poetry, and practical guides. A distinct urban culture emerged, often called the floating world. This was the world of entertainment, leisure, and display. Kabuki theater, puppet theater, bunraku, tea houses, pleasure quarters, and the new printed books and images people could buy. Kabuki offered dramatic shows, music, and fashion. Bunraku puppet plays told long, complex stories for literate audiences. Theaters were public places where commoners and samurai alike could watch and talk about the latest dramas. The printed word and the woodblock print changed how people saw the world. Publishers produced affordable picture books, travel guides, and collections of poems. Prints of actors, landscapes, and beautiful women circulated in shops and homes. The visual style of the prints, bold lines and clear design, became a popular art form that celebrated cities, actors, and famous places. Poetry and refinement remained important too. Courtly forms survived, and new literary styles grew out of city life. Poets such as Basho changed the way people wrote about travel and nature, making short verses that captured an instant of feeling. The arts were not only elite, they blended high and low, with samurai appreciating theater and merchants sponsoring tea masters and artists. Religion in the Edo world was practical and local. Temples and shrines anchored villages and towns. Buddhist temples handled funerals and memorial rites. Shinto shrines marked seasonal festivals. Local festivals, matsuri, brought communities together, offering ritual, music, food, and temporary freedom from strict daily roles. Popular religions and folk cults thrived alongside the official teachings of Buddhism and the ethical ideas of Neo-Confucianism, which the samurai class used for moral instruction. The shogunate ruled with laws and offices that tried to manage a large, ordered society. City magistrates enforced rules, regulated markets, and punished crime. Fire was a constant danger in wooden cities. Organized fire brigades and rules about building materials were practical necessities. The shogunate also intervened in domain affairs, controlled movement, and censored what it judged dangerous ideas. At the same time, local governance mattered. Villages had councils and rules to handle land taxes and dispute settlement. Local elites and officials collected taxes, organized work, and kept records. This layered administration, central rules mixed with local practice, made the Tokugawa order both strong and adaptable. The shogunate limited foreign contact, but curiosity did not stop. A controlled window to the outside world remained through trade with the Dutch at a single port. From those contacts, some Western books and techniques arrived. Scholars translated medical texts, astronomy, and practical knowledge. This limited engagement, often called Dutch learning, spread new tools and ideas among doctors, engineers, and some intellectuals, even while official policy forbade broad foreign influence. Peace made new problems visible. A growing merchant class had money, but little formal power. Samurai were proud, but sometimes poor. Population growth and limited land put pressure on resources. Regional famines and periodic disasters strained the system. Sumptuary laws and official restrictions tried to freeze social roles but could not stop change. Political life remained narrow. The shogunate and its network of daimyo set the rules and resisted opening political power more widely. The long peace also shaped attitudes and taste. Order, ritual, and refined practice became social ideals. At the same time, people learned to live with compromise. Merchants found cultural outlets to express status through patronage. Samurai became bureaucrats and cultural patrons. That blending of power and taste, of administration and art, created the distinctive society of Edo Japan. By the late Edo years, the society the Tokugawa built had developed great strengths: stable government, high literacy, rich urban culture, and an intricate economy. It also had deep weaknesses: rigid hierarchies, economic imbalances, and slow response to global change. Those strengths and weaknesses together set the stage for the dramatic transformations of the 19th century. When foreign pressure finally broke the isolation, the institutions of Edo would be both a resource for rapid modernization and an obstacle that reformers would have to overcome. Encounters and upheaval, the opening of Japan and the Meiji Restoration. For over 2 centuries, the Tokugawa regime kept Japan largely closed. That isolation gave peace, order, and a distinct culture. But isolation also made Japan vulnerable when the modern world pressed in. In the middle of the 19th century, the balance between stability and stagnation broke suddenly. Foreign ships arrived with new technology and new demands. Western powers, driven by trade and strategy, wanted ports, coal, and safe anchorages. In 1853, an American squadron under Commodore Matthew Perry entered Edo Bay. The sight of steam-powered ships and heavy guns shocked many Japanese. Perry's visit was blunt. He demanded fuel and safe ports and showed that the military gap between Japan and Western powers was serious. In 1854, the shogunate signed the first agreement that opened limited trade and docking rights. Soon after, other Western nations negotiated similar treaties. These unequal treaties strained Japanese society. They gave foreign merchants rights and protections that cut across Japanese law. They exposed the weak points of a state that had kept itself apart from industrial and military change. Some saw the treaties as proof that the shogunate had failed to protect the nation's honor. Others argued that Japan must learn from the West, import technology, and modernize quickly to survive. The presence of foreign powers sharpened old political divisions inside Japan. Many samurai and provincial lords resented the shogunate's handling of the crisis. A slogan gained urgency: "Sano Joy," revere the emperor, expel the barbarians. That phrase mixed loyalty to the imperial house with hostility to foreign influence. At the same time, more pragmatic figures argued for rapid learning: adopt Western arms, build factories, reform the state. These two tendencies, resistance and adaptation, pushed Japan toward dramatic change. Political crisis turned into open conflict. Domains that had modern weapons and stronger leadership formed alliances. The shogunate's authority weakened. In 1867, Tokugawa Yoshinobu formally returned political power to the emperor, an act presented as a restoration. But surrendering formal title did not settle the matter. Fighting broke out between forces loyal to the old order and those who wanted a new, centralized government. The Boshin War of 1868–1869 ended in victory for the imperial supporters. The old military government fell, and the Meiji leaders set out to remake the country. The Meiji Restoration was a program as much as a revolution. It aimed to build a modern nation-state fast. The new leaders made the emperor the symbol of national unity and then set about replacing feudal structures with centralized institutions. They abolished the old domains, replacing them with prefectures under appointed governors. They took control of land registration, taxation, and law. The logic was clear. To stand equal with Western powers, Japan needed a single strong state with modern administration. The early government moved quickly and often ruthlessly. It issued the Charter Oath, a short pledge that promised open deliberation, the release of social barriers, and the pursuit of knowledge. The new rulers also seized the lands and revenues of many former domains to fund state projects. They created a national army by introducing conscription. They abolished feudal privileges and worked to remove the old legal distinctions that separated samurai from commoners. Modernization was broad and practical. The state sent students and officials abroad to learn Western science, engineering, law, and industry. One famous mission, the Iwakura mission, toured the United States and Europe to study governments, education, and industry, and to negotiate the revision of treaties. Those who returned brought back technical knowledge, organizational ideas, and a vision of how a modern state might organize schools, railways, factories, and ministries. Railways, telegraphs, steamships, and modern factories changed the physical face of Japan. The government built model factories, promoted shipyards, mined coal, and encouraged private entrepreneurs. A modern postal system and new banks helped integrate local markets into a national economy. The state often led by example, creating and then selling enterprises to private businesses that would grow into powerful industrial groups. Land and taxation reforms were crucial. The government moved from a system of rice as tax to cash taxation based on assessed land value. This change stabilized revenue and made possible larger fiscal planning. It also pushed farmers into market relations. They had to sell surplus crops to pay taxes in money rather than rice. The shift helped build a market economy, but also imposed new burdens on rural households. Social change was dramatic. The samurai class lost legal privilege. Many found new roles as bureaucrats, teachers, or businessmen, while others resisted the loss of status. The Heian Edict and related measures restricted sword-wearing and other markers of samurai distinction, signaling a move toward social equality before the law. At the same time, modern legal codes and a new police system imposed uniform rules across regions. Education became a priority. The government created a national school system to teach literacy, arithmetic, and civic loyalty. Primary schools spread rapidly, and higher education institutions trained engineers, doctors, and administrators. A modern press emerged, and newspapers and journals informed and shaped public debate. Literacy and schooling created a new public sphere where ideas about politics, rights, and society could circulate. Industrialization developed unevenly, but picked up speed. Textiles led the way, with mechanized spinning and weaving replacing cottage production in many areas. Shipbuilding, mining, and machinery industries followed. The state supported early firms, which then grew into large conglomerates, later known as zaibatsu, that combined banking, manufacturing, and trade. These firms became engines of growth, but they also concentrated economic power in new hands. Military reform was central to the Meiji project. The new state created a conscript army and modern navy modeled on Western lines. Conscription turned soldiers into citizens of the state and created a national force able to defend and project power. Modern military organization, training, and technology made Japan a regional power in short order. At the same time, religion and identity were reshaped. Shinto was given new official status as a national faith centered on the emperor. Shrines and imperial rituals were used to build a sense of common identity. Buddhism lost some state support and was forced to adapt to a modern legal and social environment. The reforms mixed belief with politics. Religion became one tool among many to foster national unity. The push to modernize had costs. Rapid change disrupted traditional livelihoods. Peasants burdened by taxes sometimes rebelled. Former samurai, stripped of stipends and privilege, occasionally rose in insurrection. Social dislocation and economic inequality accompanied growth. The state responded with a mix of repression and reform, building infrastructure, supporting industry, and creating new social safety nets where possible. By the 1890s, Japan's modernization showed its power. Victories in war marked Japan's arrival as a military and imperial actor. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894–1895 brought dominance over Korea and influence in Taiwan. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904–1905 stunned the world when a non-Western power defeated a great European empire. These victories confirmed that Japan's state-led modernization had created a strong military and a competitive industrial base. Politically, reform moved toward constitutionalism. In 1889, the Meiji Constitution created a form of constitutional monarchy with an elected assembly, the Diet, and a chamber of peers. The emperor retained significant authority, and powerful bureaucrats and military leaders continued to shape policy. Still, the Constitution and the Diet opened space for party politics, debate, and gradual expansion of participation. Economic growth and political change were uneven. New elites, industrialists, bureaucrats, and modern military officers gained influence. Local elites sometimes resisted. Women's roles began to shift slowly. Education for girls expanded, and a few women entered public life as teachers, writers, and activists. Labor movements and social critics emerged, pressing for better wages, shorter hours, and more rights. The Meiji decades thus created a paradox. Japan became modern and powerful with extraordinary speed, but modernization also fostered imperial ambition and internal tensions. The state that had succeeded in building railways and factories also used its strength to expand overseas. The gains of industrialization, wealth, technology, and central authority fed the drive for territory, resources, and international status. In short, the opening of Japan and the Meiji Restoration were a single arc. Humiliation or threat from abroad triggered vigorous national renewal, and that renewal created a modern state capable of competing with Western powers. The transformation remade politics, economy, society, religion, and daily life. It replaced a society organized around rice and local obligations with a nation mobilized for industry, taxation, and war. Empire and war, Taishō democracy, and early Shōwa militarism. By the start of the 20th century, Japan was a world power. It had modern industries, a strong army and navy, and growing colonial possessions. Victories over China in 1895 and Russia in 1905 shocked the world. Korea was annexed in 1910, and Taiwan was already under Japanese control. The empire was expanding, and Japan's leaders believed their nation had proven itself equal to the West. But the decades that followed showed a double story. On one side, democracy, culture, and new freedoms. On the other, militarism, economic pressure, and a path toward war. The Taishō era, promise and possibility. Emperor Taishō ascended the throne in 1912. Unlike his father, Meiji, he was not a commanding figure. His health was fragile and his public presence limited. But this weakness in the throne left more space for political parties in parliament to take a larger role. Many called the period the age of Taishō democracy. Political parties gained new strength. Cabinets were increasingly chosen from the party that held the majority in the Diet. Debates were louder, and newspapers reported every twist and turn of politics. In 1925, the government passed universal male suffrage, granting voting rights to all adult men. Millions more citizens now had a voice, at least in theory. Political life seemed to be opening. Urban culture reflected the same sense of openness. Cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and Yokohama grew quickly. Department stores, modern cafes, and cinemas became part of daily life for the urban middle class. Jazz bands played in dance halls, while novels and magazines circulated in the thousands. Women began to work as typists, telephone operators, and shop assistants. Young people experimented with fashion, short hair, Western suits, and for some women, shorter skirts and bobbed cuts. A phrase appeared in the 1920s, the modern girl, or moga, representing independence and new taste. Social movements also stirred. Labor unions organized strikes, farmers protested unfair rents, and women demanded education and rights. Writers and activists debated socialism, communism, and liberal reform. Not all movements were tolerated. Police monitored radicals and banned dangerous groups, but the energy of public debate was unmistakable. Japan in the First World War. The First World War gave Japan both opportunities and frustrations. Japan joined the Allies, declaring war on Germany in 1914. Its forces seized German bases in China and islands in the Pacific. Japanese exports soared as Europe's factories turned to war production. Shipbuilding, textiles, and heavy industry grew fast. For a moment, Japan seemed to be on the edge of great prosperity. At the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Japan sat among the victors. It gained German possessions in the Pacific and confirmed its hold over former German leaseholds in China. But Japan's attempt to add a racial equality clause to the League of Nations covenant was rejected by Western powers. The refusal stung deeply. Many Japanese saw it as proof that the West still looked down on their nation, no matter its achievements. This mixture, economic growth, new territories, but lingering humiliation, shaped how Japanese leaders thought about their future. Strains of prosperity and the Great Kanto earthquake. The prosperity of wartime did not last. By the early 1920s, the economy slowed. Factories laid off workers. Farmers suffered as rice prices fell. Discontent grew. Then, in 1923, tragedy struck. The Great Kanto earthquake hit Tokyo and Yokohama with terrible force. Buildings collapsed, fires spread, and entire neighborhoods vanished. More than 100,000 people died. Survivors lived in makeshift camps, food ran short, and disease threatened. In the chaos, rumors spread that Korean residents were poisoning wells or plotting revolt. Mobs attacked Korean communities, and thousands were killed in vigilante violence. The earthquake revealed the fragility of urban life and the deep tensions in Japanese society. Yet, reconstruction also showed Japan's resilience. New city planning, broader streets, and stronger concrete buildings rose where old wooden homes had burned. Tokyo re-emerged as a modern capital with wider avenues and new infrastructure. Still, the scars of fear, rumor, and violence lingered. The shadow of militarism. In the 1920s, Japan remained a constitutional monarchy, but the military held special privileges. The Army and Navy each had the right to choose their own ministers, which gave them direct leverage over cabinets. Even in the era of parliamentary politics, the armed forces stood apart. The Washington Naval Conference of 1921-1922 tried to set limits on battleships to preserve peace. Japan agreed to a ratio that gave it fewer ships than Britain and the United States. Many Japanese officers felt humiliated. They believed Japan was treated as a second-class power, even after proving its strength. Resentment grew within the military. Economic troubles deepened the divide. Farmers faced falling prices and crushing debt. In rural villages, families sometimes sold daughters into factories or brothels to survive. The promise of Taishō democracy seemed hollow for many outside the cities. Radical officers in the army began to argue that Japan's survival depended on expansion abroad and strict discipline at home. The Manchurian Incident and a New Path. In 1931, the turning point came. Without clear orders from Tokyo, Japanese officers in Manchuria staged an incident on the railway and used it as a pretext to occupy the region. Within months, the army controlled all of Manchuria. Civilian politicians protested, but they could not reverse the military's actions. In 1932, Japan declared the creation of a puppet state, Manchukuo, with the last Qing emperor, Puyi, as its figurehead. The League of Nations condemned the occupation. Japan responded by walking out of the League in 1933. That decision marked a clear step away from international cooperation and toward isolation and defiance. The military, having acted on its own, gained even more independence and confidence. The 1930s toward total war. The global Great Depression hit Japan hard. Exports collapsed, farmers starved, and unemployment soared. Political parties struggled to respond. Corruption scandals further eroded trust in politicians. For many, democracy seemed weak, unable to protect the nation. In that environment, the military and ultranationalists gained support. Young officers plotted coups and assassinations. In 1932, Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi was murdered by naval officers. Other attempted coups followed in 1936, when army rebels tried to seize control of Tokyo. Each failure was followed by trials and executions, but the effect was the same. The authority of civilian politicians shrank, while the military's voice grew louder. Nationalist groups promoted emperor worship, discipline, and sacrifice. Schools drilled students in loyalty and obedience. Propaganda glorified the soldier's life. Police suppressed socialist and liberal movements. By the late 1930s, the democratic experiment of Taishō was effectively over. Japan had become a mobilized state preparing for war. In China. In 1937, a clash near the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing escalated into full war. Japan's armies poured into China. Shanghai, Nanjing, and other cities fell under assault. The war was long and brutal. Civilians suffered immensely. At Nanjing, Japanese soldiers committed mass killings and atrocities that shocked the world. The conflict, expected to be swift, dragged on. China resisted fiercely, supported by the United States and other powers. Japan poured men and resources into the war, but victory remained elusive. The war consumed the economy and hardened Japanese society. Rationing, censorship, and mobilization became daily realities at home. Toward the Pacific War. As the 1930s turned into the 1940s, Japan's ambitions expanded further. Leaders spoke of a Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, a vision of Asian nations united under Japanese leadership, free from Western colonialism. But in practice, Japanese occupation often meant harsh rule and exploitation. To secure resources, Japan moved into French Indochina and looked to Southeast Asia. Western powers responded with sanctions. The United States imposed an oil embargo, cutting off a vital resource. Japan faced a stark choice: retreat or seize new territories rich in oil and raw materials. In December 1941, Japan chose war. Its forces struck Pearl Harbor, crippling the U.S. Pacific Fleet, and at the same time launched attacks across Asia. For months, Japan advanced rapidly, seizing the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and the Dutch East Indies. The empire reached its greatest size, stretching across East and Southeast Asia and the Pacific. But success was brief. By 1942, the tide began to turn. Battles at Midway and Guadalcanal shifted momentum to the Allies. Japan faced a war of attrition it could not win. As years passed, the empire shrank, cities burned under air raids, and the nation braced for invasion. This chapter ends with Japan on the edge of catastrophe. The hopes of Taishō democracy had dissolved into the darkness of militarism. Expansion brought not stability, but endless war. The next act in the story is the final collapse, defeat, occupation, and the rebuilding of Japan in the ashes of 1945. Defeat and occupation, 1945, and the post-war transformation. By the summer of 1945, Japan was a nation on the edge of collapse. Years of war had drained its economy, destroyed its cities, and exhausted its people. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins from relentless bombing. Families struggled to find food. Malnutrition and disease spread. The empire, once vast, was shrinking rapidly as Allied armies advanced on every front. The final blows. In March 1945, the firebombing of Tokyo unleashed destruction on a scale never before seen. American bombers dropped incendiaries that turned the wooden capital into a sea of fire. Entire districts vanished overnight, tens of thousands burned to death, and survivors staggered through smoking ruins. Similar raids reduced Osaka, Nagoya, Kobe, and dozens of smaller cities to ashes. By mid-1945, more than half of Japan's urban space was gone. Yet the government refused to surrender. Leaders demanded one last decisive battle to bleed the enemy and win better terms. Civilians drilled with bamboo spears and schoolchildren dug trenches. The army mobilized women and the elderly to prepare for an invasion, but the will to fight was breaking under hunger, bombing, and despair. On August 6, 1945, Hiroshima became the first city in history to be destroyed by an atomic bomb. In a blinding flash, the heart of the city vanished. Tens of thousands died instantly. Many more suffered burns, radiation sickness, and long-term illnesses. 3 days later, Nagasaki met the same fate. The destruction was beyond comprehension. That same week, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria, defeating the Kwantung Army in days. Surrounded by catastrophe, Japan's leaders finally accepted surrender. The voice of the Emperor. On August 15, 1945, radios across Japan crackled with the voice of Emperor Hirohito. It was the first time ordinary people had heard him speak. His words were formal, indirect, but clear. Japan would endure the unendurable and accept defeat. Families wept, bowed, or sat in stunned silence. The myth of the emperor as a divine, untouchable ruler had shifted. He was now a human voice on the radio, announcing surrender. On September 2nd, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, Japanese representatives signed the instrument of surrender. The war was over. Chaos in return. Defeat triggered massive human movement. Millions of soldiers laid down arms. Civilians who had lived in colonies and occupied territories, Korea, Taiwan, Manchuria, Southeast Asia, poured back into the home islands. Ships and trains carried repatriates who arrived hungry, sick, and traumatized. Housing was scarce. Families were torn apart. At the same time, demobilized soldiers returned to towns already struggling. Many had no jobs, no homes, no prospects. Cities were full of black markets where rice and cloth were traded for valuables. The official rationing system barely kept people alive. Malnutrition was common, and many survived only through illegal trade or support from relatives in the countryside. The occupation and its goals. Into this chaos stepped the Allied occupation, led primarily by the United States, under General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, as CAPE. The occupation lasted from 1945 to 1952. Its goals were twofold: demilitarize Japan so it could never again threaten peace, and democratize it so it could become a stable, open society. The first steps were immediate. The military was dissolved. Weapons were confiscated and destroyed. War industries were dismantled. Leaders of the wartime government and military were arrested, and the International Military Tribunal for the Far East, often called the Tokyo War Crimes Trial, began in 1946. Former prime ministers, generals, and industrial leaders stood accused of crimes against peace and humanity. Some were executed, others imprisoned, and many ordinary Japanese watched with a mix of shock, denial, and resignation. Land reform and rural change. One of the most transformative policies was land reform. Before the war, many farmers worked as tenants under landlords who owned large estates. The occupation government forced landlords to sell land at low prices, which was then resold to tenants at affordable rates. Millions of farmers became landowners. This reform weakened old elites and gave rural families security. It also reduced the risk of rural uprisings and made Japan's villages a stable base for democracy. Social and political reform. The occupation sought to transform Japanese politics. A new constitution was drafted quickly. Introduced in 1947, it changed the nation profoundly. Sovereignty now rested with the people, not the emperor. The emperor was reduced to a symbolic figure, stripped of political power. A parliamentary system with a freely elected legislature replaced the old imperial system. A broad Bill of Rights guaranteed freedom of speech, press, assembly, and religion. Article 9 renounced war and prohibited Japan from maintaining armed forces for aggression. For women, the Constitution was revolutionary. They gained the right to vote, and in 1946, women cast ballots in national elections for the first time. Female politicians entered the Diet, changing the face of Japanese democracy. Education was also reformed. The old system that emphasized loyalty and obedience to the emperor was replaced with a more liberal model. New curricula encouraged critical thinking and civic responsibility. Schools became co-educational, and opportunities expanded for girls. Labor reform legalized unions and collective bargaining. Workers organized strikes and demanded better pay and conditions. For the first time, ordinary workers had a recognized voice in industry and politics. Culture and daily life. The defeat and occupation reshaped daily life. American culture flooded in. Jazz, baseball, Hollywood films, and blue jeans became part of post-war Japan. For many, these symbols carried a mix of novelty, humiliation, and excitement. They represented both the conqueror's culture and a new, freer way of life. Censorship flipped direction. During the war, the state censored criticism of the government. Under the occupation, criticism of militarism was encouraged, while criticism of the occupation itself was restricted. Newspapers, magazines, and films presented images of peace, democracy, and modern life. Daily survival remained hard. Rations were inadequate, black markets thrived, and malnutrition persisted into the late 1940s. Housing shortages were severe, especially in bombed cities. Families crowded into small rooms or makeshift shelters. Despite hardship, people adapted. Communities rebuilt homes with scrap wood and tin. Public bathhouses reopened. Slowly, life returned. Memory and responsibility. The Tokyo war crimes trials were only part of how Japan confronted its wartime past. In schools, in books, and in public debate, people wrestled with the meaning of defeat. Some felt deep guilt, others felt victimized by leaders who had misled the nation. Survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, hibakusha, bore the physical scars of burns and radiation. Many also faced social discrimination, as employers and neighbors feared illness. Their testimony would later become central to Japan's identity as a nation committed to peace. The early Cold War and policy shift. As the occupation unfolded, the international climate changed. The Cold War divided the world into rival blocs. For the United States, Japan shifted from being a defeated enemy to a potential ally in Asia against communism. By the late 1940s, SCAP encouraged economic recovery and reduced some reforms that had weakened business leaders. Labor strikes were restricted, and conservative politicians regained ground. The outbreak of the Korean War in 1950 transformed Japan's economy. The United States used Japan as a supply base, ordering ships, vehicles, uniforms, and goods. Factories that had been idle roared back to life. This special procurement boom became the foundation for Japan's post-war economic recovery. End of the occupation. In 1952, the occupation formally ended with the San Francisco Peace Treaty. Japan regained sovereignty, though it remained under the security umbrella of the United States. American bases stayed on Japanese soil, and the alliance became a cornerstone of Japan's foreign policy. By then, Japan was a different country. Its old empire was gone. Its military was disbanded. Its political system was democratic. Its society more equal. Its economy beginning to grow again. The trauma of defeat was immense, But the transformation laid the groundwork for what came next, an era of astonishing economic growth and cultural reinvention. Post-war recovery and the economic miracle. When the occupation ended in 1952, Japan was free again, but the nation was still scarred by war. Cities had been rebuilt in fragments, industries were fragile, and millions remained poor. Yet within a generation, Japan would astonish the world. It rose from ashes to become the second largest economy on Earth. This transformation, often called the Japanese economic miracle, was built on resilience, planning, and the determination of ordinary people. Rebuilding the foundations. The 1950s were a decade of recovery. War damage was repaired step by step. Factories reopened. Roads, bridges, and ports were rebuilt with modern methods. Power plants brought electricity to new regions, and telephone lines connected towns. The government encouraged reconstruction through targeted investment. Ministries such as MITI, the Ministry of International Trade and Industry, became central planners, guiding which industries received support. Protectionist policies shielded Japanese firms while they modernized. Import restrictions and licensing gave the state strong influence over the economy. American aid also played a role. During the Korean War, 1950-1953, U.S. forces ordered supplies from Japanese companies, uniforms, vehicles, machine parts, food. This special procurement boom poured dollars into Japan and restarted idle industries. Shipyards, steel plants, and textile factories found new life. What began as wartime supply quickly became the spark for long-term growth. The Japanese model of the industry. By the late 1950s, Japanese firms had begun to develop a distinctive way of working. Companies emphasized long-term employment, building loyalty between worker and firm. Seniority-based pay and promotion gave workers a sense of stability. Unions existed, but often cooperated closely with management rather than fighting it. The focus was on shared success. Firms worked closely with banks. Credit was directed to industries the government considered strategic: steel, shipbuilding, chemicals, and later, automobiles and electronics. Instead of short-term profit, the system encouraged investment in modernization and productivity. Innovation was not always about invention, but about improvement. Japanese companies became famous for kaizen, continuous small improvements that raised quality and efficiency. Workers were encouraged to suggest changes, and managers listened. This culture of careful refinement helped Japan's products rise from cheap imitations to world-class standards. Urban growth and social change. The economic miracle reshaped daily life. Millions left rural villages for cities. Tokyo, Osaka, and Nagoya expanded at breathtaking speed. Suburbs grew, linked by trains and buses. Apartment blocks and new homes filled once empty fields. Consumer culture flourished. By the 1960s, families measured success with the three sacred treasures: a television, a washing machine, and a refrigerator. Later, the car joined the list. New highways and bullet trains tied the nation together. In 1964, the Shinkansen opened between Tokyo and Osaka, a symbol of speed, technology, and confidence. Education expanded rapidly. Universities trained engineers, managers, and scientists. Technical high schools prepared workers for new industries. A growing middle class demanded more schooling for children, seeing education as the path to upward mobility. Literacy and numeracy were nearly universal. Women's roles shifted slowly. More girls completed secondary school, and some entered universities. Many worked in factories or offices before marriage. Though expectations still tied women to home and family, rising incomes and consumer goods changed household life. Housewives managed budgets, purchased appliances, and shaped consumer demand. International recognition. The 1964 Tokyo Olympics announced Japan's return to the world stage. Modern stadiums, clean trains, and bustling streets displayed recovery and energy. The Shinkansen, launched just in time for the Games, impressed visitors with its speed and safety. Images of athletes running under neon lights showed that Japan was no longer a war-torn nation, but a modern industrial power. Exports became the engine of growth. At first, Japan sold textiles and simple goods, but soon ships, cars, cameras, and radios carried the label "Made in Japan." By the 1970s, Japanese cars and electronics were renowned for reliability and price. Companies like Toyota, Sony, and Panasonic became global brands. Everyday life in the miracle years. The benefits of growth touched daily life. Incomes rose steadily. People ate better, lived longer, and enjoyed more leisure. Diets shifted from rice and vegetables toward more meat, bread, and dairy. Department stores, cinemas, and cafes filled with customers. Domestic tourism flourished, with families traveling by train to see famous temples, mountains, and hot springs. Yet, growth also brought problems. Pollution darkened skies and poisoned rivers. Factories dumped mercury, cadmium, and other toxins, causing illnesses in communities near industrial sites. Famous cases like Minamata disease, caused by mercury poisoning, became symbols of the hidden cost of rapid development. Public protest and lawsuits in the 1960s forced stricter environmental laws. Labor, too, had strains. Though many workers enjoyed stable employment in large firms, others, especially women and part-time workers, faced insecure jobs and lower pay. Rural communities lost population, and urban crowding created new social stresses. Politics and stability. The Liberal Democratic Party, LDP, founded in 1955, dominated politics during the miracle years. Its coalition of business interests, rural supporters, and bureaucratic allies kept it in power almost without interruption. The party emphasized growth, stability, and close ties with the United States. Student protests and left-wing movements challenged the system, especially in the 1960s. Demonstrations against the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty in 1960 filled Tokyo streets with hundreds of thousands of protesters. But the protests did not overturn the system. Economic prosperity softened dissent. For most, the promise of better living outweighed political radicalism. Energy, shocks, and resilience. By the early 1970s, Japan's dependence on imported oil was clear. When the 1973 oil crisis struck, prices soared and growth slowed sharply. Factories cut back and inflation rose. Yet Japan adapted. Companies invested in energy efficiency, building cars and machines that used less fuel. This adaptation turned into a strength as Japanese exports gained a reputation for efficiency just as the world needed it most. By the end of the 1970s, Japan had firmly established itself as a global economic powerhouse. Its GDP ranked second only to that of the United States. Its companies set standards in technology and manufacturing. Its cities symbolized modern life in Asia. The human dimension. Behind the statistics lay the lives of ordinary people. Families who had known hunger in the 1940s now ate 3 meals a day. Children who studied by candlelight in ruins now watched television in bright apartments. Workers who once feared layoffs found lifelong careers in large firms. The psychological shift was enormous. The shame of defeat gave way to pride and achievement. Japan's success became part of its national identity. The economic miracle was proof that hard work, discipline, and cooperation could transform a nation. By 1980, Japan was no longer just a survivor of war. It was a global leader in trade, technology, and culture. Yet the very system that fueled its rise, long-term employment, bureaucratic guidance, and export-driven growth, would face new challenges in the decades ahead. Contemporary Japan, challenges and change. By the 1980s, Japan stood as an economic giant. Its cities glittered with neon lights, bullet trains, and skyscrapers. Its companies dominated global markets in cars, electronics, and precision machinery. The nation that had been bombed to ashes in 1945 now seemed unstoppable. Yet the story of contemporary Japan is more complex. Prosperity brought new challenges: financial excess, social strains, political shifts, and the weight of an aging society. The bubble years. In the 1980s, Japan's economy surged. Exports poured out. Toyotas filled American highways, Sony Walkmans defined youth culture, and Japanese semiconductors powered computers. Trade surpluses grew so large that some in the United States feared Japan would overtake it as the world's leading power. At home, cheap credit and speculation fueled a frenzy. Stock markets soared. Real estate prices skyrocketed, especially in Tokyo and Osaka. The value of land in Tokyo's Ginza district was said to exceed that of entire countries. Companies borrowed heavily, banks lent freely, and individuals speculated in property and shares. The mood was euphoric. But this boom could not last. In the early 1990s, the bubble burst. Property prices collapsed, stock values plunged, banks were left with massive bad loans, families and companies lost fortunes. Growth slowed sharply. What followed became known as the lost decade, a period of stagnation that stretched well beyond 10 years. The lost decades. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Japan struggled with deflation, slow growth, and financial instability. Government spending and stimulus programs tried to revive the economy but created huge public debt. Interest rates fell close to zero. Confidence waned. The social impact was deep. Lifetime employment, once a pillar of stability, weakened. More workers entered insecure, temporary jobs. Young people faced uncertain futures. A new term, freeter, described part-time workers drifting between low-paying jobs. Another term, hikikomori, described individuals withdrawing from society, often isolating themselves in their homes. At the same time, Japan remained wealthy. Its infrastructure, technology, and standard of living stayed high. But the contrast between prosperity on paper and stagnation in growth created a sense of unease. The miracle was over, and Japan had to adapt to a new reality. Demographic pressures. One of Japan's greatest challenges emerged in numbers. Its population was aging rapidly. Fertility rates declined, and life expectancy rose to some of the highest in the world. By the 21st century, nearly one-third of the population was over 65. This shift strained pensions, healthcare, and the labor force. Rural villages emptied as young people left for cities. Schools closed in small towns, while urban centers coped with crowded housing and shrinking workforces. The government experimented with policies to encourage higher birth rates, including childcare support and parental leave, but the trend was hard to reverse. Robotics and automation became part of the solution. Japanese firms developed machines to assist in factories, hospitals, and even elder care. Technology became both a symbol of innovation and a necessity for an aging society. Politics and international relations. Politically, Japan remained dominated by the Liberal Democratic Party, though periods of coalition and opposition rule appeared. Leaders wrestled with balancing economic reform, social policy, and security. Japan's international role also evolved. The U.S.-Japan alliance remained the cornerstone of foreign policy, with American bases still stationed in Japan, particularly in Okinawa. Relations with neighbors were more difficult. Disputes with China and South Korea over history, territory, and wartime memory created recurring tensions. At the same time, trade and investment tied these economies together. Japan also contributed to global peace through non-combat roles, financial aid, disaster relief, and participation in United Nations missions. Constitutional limits on military action, rooted in Article 9, kept Japan's self-defense forces focused on defense and humanitarian missions, though debates about constitutional revision continued. Disasters and resilience. Nature tested Japan repeatedly. Earthquakes remained a constant threat. In 1995, the Great Hanshin earthquake struck Kobe, killing thousands and destroying much of the city. The disaster exposed flaws in infrastructure and government response, prompting reforms in emergency planning. The most devastating event of recent times came in March 2011. A massive earthquake off the northeast coast triggered a tsunami that swept away towns, killing nearly 20,000 people. The waves also disabled the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant, causing a meltdown. Radiation forced tens of thousands to evacuate, and debates over nuclear energy shook the nation. The disaster revealed vulnerability, but also resilience. Volunteers, local communities, and government workers rebuilt step by step. The tragedy also revived discussions about energy policy, disaster prevention, and community solidarity. Culture and global influence. Even as Japan faced economic and demographic challenges, its culture spread worldwide. Anime and manga became global phenomena. Films by directors such as Kurosawa, Miyazaki, and Kurosawa Kiyoshi found international acclaim. Video games from Nintendo and Sony defined entertainment for generations. Japanese cuisine, sushi, ramen, tempura, became global favorites. At home, cultural diversity expanded. Foreign workers and immigrants began to fill labor shortages in factories, farms, and elder care. Though immigration remained limited compared to many countries, Japan slowly became more multicultural. Fashion, design, and technology kept Japan visible on the global stage. From Tokyo's streetwear to Kyoto's traditional crafts, the country balanced modern trends with deep tradition. Festivals, shrines, and rituals continued alongside neon lights and high-speed trains. A nation in balance. Contemporary Japan is a country of contrasts. It is one of the richest societies in the world, yet it struggles with slow growth and aging. Its cities are among the most advanced, yet rural areas fade into silence. Its culture is deeply traditional, yet also a source of global pop phenomena. Japan today remains a nation constantly adapting. It lives with memory of war, defeat, and reconstruction. It lives with natural risks, earthquakes, tsunamis, and storms. It lives with pride in craftsmanship, education, and resilience. The story of contemporary Japan is not only about economics or politics. It is about how a people continue to balance past and future, stability and change, tradition and innovation. From ashes to miracle to the challenges of today, Japan's journey is still unfolding, shaped by its geography, its history, and the determination of its people. Epilogue: A Journey Through Time. Japan's story is one of constant transformation. From the earliest rice fields and the myths of the sun goddess, to the elegant courts of Heian, to the rise of samurai and the Shoguns' rule, the nation has been shaped by both continuity and change. Mountains, seas, and storms gave it a landscape of beauty and danger. Human hands built rituals, castles, and cities that carried memory forward. For centuries, warriors fought and poets wrote. Daimyo raised armies while monks carved statues of bronze and wood. Merchants filled the towns with trade, while peasants bent their backs to the land. The rhythm of life was often harsh, but always resilient. In Edo, peace brought growth. Villages and cities wove a fabric of order that lasted longer than anyone could have imagined. Then came upheaval. Foreign ships broke isolation. The Meiji reformers pulled Japan into a new age, building railways, factories, and armies. In just one generation, Japan stood among the great powers of the world. Pride and ambition carried it further, across seas and into wars that would end in ruin. The defeat of 1945 was both an ending and a beginning. Cities burned, families suffered, and yet from that devastation came a new vision, a nation dedicated to peace, rebuilt on democracy, education, and industry. Out of the rubble rose the miracle of modern Japan, a country of bullet trains, cameras, and cars, of thriving cities and global culture. Today, Japan faces new questions: how to care for its aging population, how to balance tradition and change, how to stand firm in a shifting world. Earthquakes shake its land, and global markets test its economy. Yet the same spirit that survived centuries of war, disaster, and renewal continues to endure. Japan's past is never only history. It is present in a tea bowl carefully crafted, in a temple bell that echoes across valleys, in the steel of a car engine, in the colors of an anime film. Old values and new inventions live side by side. Honor, discipline, and resilience guide a society that has always found a way to endure and to adapt. This is the journey of Japan, from myth to empire, from ashes to miracle, from the struggles of the past to the challenges of the present. It is a story still unfolding, written in every season of cherry blossoms, every street of Tokyo neon, every quiet shrine where people bow their heads. And in that story, the world continues to see not only Japan's history, but also its spirit, a spirit shaped by change, tested by hardship, and always turning again and again toward renewal. To all of you who have followed this journey, thank you. Your attention and support keep these stories alive. Every listener, every reader, every subscriber gives meaning to the work of telling history in a way that connects us across time and space. History is not just about the past, it is about the present we share and the future we imagine together. Thank you for being part of this exploration of Japan's story.